and by my colleague Johan Hammerstrom. Today we've got a couple of tips on the webinar. We will be monitoring the chat, so please feel free to chat in questions. We have some things that were answered ahead of time or asked ahead of time, and so we'll be monitoring that throughout the event and be responding to that. Make sure you respond to a couple of polls. We have a couple of those that will be popping up, and avoid multitasking. You might just miss the best part. And of course, the webinar PowerPoint and recording will be shared out after the webinar, so if you miss something, don't worry. We'll send you out a copy of this later.
All right. A few things about Community IT Innovators. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, Community IT Innovators, we've been around for about 20 years, and we're an IT firm here in Washington, D.C. We partner with nonprofits to help them solve their strategic and day-to-day IT challenges. Some of the things that sort of distinguish our services, one, we take a very strategic and proactive approach to the work that we do, and I think you'll see that here today in our webinar. We're very collaborative. We have a team of over 40 staff, and our goal is to really work with the organizations we support to help them do their work more effectively. We're deeply committed and invested, as I mentioned earlier. We've been doing this for about 20 years, and we focus solely on the nonprofit space. A little bit about our presenters today. My name is Johan Hammerstrom. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Community IT Innovators, and I'm joined by Matthew Eshleman.
I'm the Chief Technology Officer here. We've got our Twitter handles and email addresses, so please feel free to follow us on Twitter, send us an email for any follow-up questions that you might have that come out of the webinar today.
So let's get started. Let's just jump right into it. We have a really, it's not a long webinar, but it's packed with great information. We hope you get a lot out of it. We just want to get right to it. So we're going to be covering 4 things today around the topic of cloud-based file sharing. The first one is the problem. This is actually probably going to be one of our most popular webinars to date in terms of the number of people who are registered for it and are joining us here today. And so I think there is a big problem out there with cloud-based file sharing, and a lot of people are wondering, including us, what's the solution to this problem? And the reality is there are a crowd of solutions, and I think that reflects the fact that a single great solution hasn't really emerged yet. So there are a lot of people trying to develop a solution for this problem. We're going to talk a little bit about sort of the general requirements that would need to be in place for any effective cloud-based file sharing solution. And then finally, we want to really spend the bulk of our time here today talking about what we consider to be the best options and sort of going through the pros and cons of each of those options so that you have a better idea of what's out there and what might be a good fit for your organization. Before we get started with that, we want to conduct our first poll. And the poll is basically, how large is your organization? And we want to get a sense of the size of the attendees of our webinar today.
Great. So we'll just leave this open for a few seconds to give folks a chance to just quickly give their response, and we'll get a sense of you can get a sense of the peers that are on the poll here today, or on the webinar today. Great. Leave it open for a few more seconds, getting most folks responded here. All right. Great. So it looks like most of the folks in the webinar today are in the 1 to 20 person range, with folks in the 20 to 50 range. So I think this organization size is kind of well suited to taking advantage of some of the cloud solutions that we're going to be talking about for files.
Mm-hmm. Great. So let's talk a little bit about the cloud. And the cloud is a pretty familiar concept in the world of IT these days. And a lot of our information systems have already gone into the cloud. So what are some of the things that have gone into the cloud? Email. We've seen a lot of clients move to Google Apps and Office 365 in the last few years. Accounting systems are moving to the cloud. QuickBooks even, which is kind of long been a locally hosted and run software, has now moved to the cloud. Fundraising is actually something that was probably one of the first systems that I saw in the cloud all the way back in 2001 with a solution called eTapestry. that a couple of our clients were using. So fundraising systems have been in the cloud for a long time. We're starting to see CRM solutions. In fact, Salesforce, one of the most popular CRM solutions, both in and outside the world of nonprofits, was built as a cloud-based solution. Blast emails like Constant Contact and MailChimp, those are all cloud-based solutions. And even phones have moved into the cloud. A lot of organizations now, their VoIP system or their telephony system is a hosted solution. They don't have anything on-premise. So all of these things have moved to the cloud. Actually, if you could roll back real quick, Matt, we want to do our second poll. How many IT systems have you moved out into the cloud? We want to get a sense of kind of where our audience is in terms of cloud adoption.
So as Johan mentioned, we're going to just get a sense of how many IT systems have been moved out to the cloud. Of that list, are you kind of all in the cloud, halfway there, a quarter of the way, just thinking about it? So again, we'll get a pulse to see where folks are at in terms of their own adoption in the organizations that they are working at now. All right, great. We're getting most folks in here. Appreciate all of the response. I feel like the polls really help to, inform us about where folks in the audience are at, and then also to share that information with everyone else that's attending as well. So today it looks like most people are, have moved some of their systems to the cloud, with their top, 3% have already moved everything. So, we've got most folks have got a ways to go in terms of sharing things and moving their IT systems into the cloud. So of those, and the reason we had kind of files as their own standalone question is because from our perspective we've seen most of these systems move already, but not files.
So the question is, why not? A lot of people have seen the advantage of moving their information systems out into the cloud, as we just saw. But files, unfortunately, remain sort of intractably located on-premise, on your machine, in the closet, in the server room. And I think understanding why that's the case really helps us to understand sort of the variety of solutions to this particular problem. So I think it's important to take a step back and investigate this question of files a little bit more. And I think people talk about file, cloud-based file sharing and file storage without really understanding what is meant by the word file. So when we say files, what we mean are actually these things: Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, PowerPoint presentations, publications, whether that's in Microsoft Publisher or Adobe PageMaker or some other program, and then a fair number of image and video editing. And I think most organizations, when if you were to take all the things that they have on their file server, 90% or more would fall into one of these categories. So we got another poll. Keep you on your toes today. Want to find out which one of these types of files is most essential to your organization. And if you haven't thought about that before or don't know, just take your best guess.
So we've got the choice for your Word documents, your Excel spreadsheets, for those out there that love their pivot tables, maybe PowerPoint. You do a lot of presentations, sharing of information, publications. As I'm watching the numbers come in, it seems like the images and videos is becoming a higher priority, and I think we certainly see that as the file servers that we manage, the proportion of that data that shows up as images and videos is certainly increasing at an exponential pace. So appreciate everybody's feedback, and we'll go ahead and share those results. So most folks, the Word documents are the most important, followed by those Excel spreadsheets, with images and videos, publications, and PowerPoint kind of following up behind.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks, everybody, for those responses. And I think what this really shows us is that when we talk about files, we're really talking about Office files, Office documents. And this leads me to a quote from one of my favorite analysts, Benedict Evans. He does a weekly podcast called Cube. And if you're into that sort of thing, I would strongly recommend listening to it. It's fascinating. And in the 14th episode of Cubed, which was last week, or the week before last, Benedict had the following quote. He said, "Office is a lot, and the extent to which people decide they need or don't need Office drives a lot of other behavior. There's a big question around the future of Microsoft Office and the future of the underlying tasks that are being done by Microsoft Office." And the fact that most of the files that we talk about when we talk about cloud-based file storage are Office documents means that all of the limitations, restrictions, challenges that come from using Office documents and putting them in the cloud are the limitations around finding a general solution to cloud-based file storage. What do I mean by that? Well, all of that is part of the Microsoft ecosystem. So we're talking about Office. And for those of you with a long enough memory, 15, 20 years ago, Office was not the dominant system. Office competed with things like Corel WordPerfect, with Lotus 123, Lotus Note. There was a much wider range of options 15, 20 years ago for how you're going to do Office productivity. But Microsoft, very shrewdly, through building a great product and also through a strategy of basically tying all of their products together, really brought Office into dominance in the last 5 to 10 years. So basically, if you wanted to use Office, you could use it on a Mac, but for it to really work well, you needed to use it on a Windows machine, whether that was XP or Windows 7. And if you were using your Office, on your Windows machine, then you were probably storing that file on a Windows file server. And so when most of us think about file storage, the files we're talking about are Office files, and the storage we're talking about is Windows-based storage. So it's basically it's a sort of integrated ecosystem. And this creates problems because, so let's think for a minute about cloud-based solutions. So what are sort of the qualities of cloud-based solutions? Cloud-based solutions, so think about the apps you have on your phone, your Evernote, your Facebook even. Cloud-based solutions tend to be easy to use remotely. They tend to be platform independent, so they work equally well on a mobile device. They work equally well on an Android device as they do on an iPhone, on an iPad as they do on a Windows machine. And they tend to have strong mobile presence. So these are some of the hallmarks of cloud-based systems. So we sort of basically, the hallmarks of a cloud-based solution is essentially on a collision course with what has worked well for Microsoft over the last 20 years. You've got the Microsoft traditional ecosystem on one side, cloud-based solution on the other, and the end result is a big conflict because all of those things about that work well in the cloud are not how Microsoft has sort of built its system to work. And in fact, I want to take you on a little thought experiment, if you will. So this is a nice graphic that shows you what the world would look like if Microsoft, sort of had its way in 2014. So in the world of the cloud, everything you'd use would be Microsoft. You'd have a Windows phone, a Windows tablet. You buy everything from Zoom. You buy your apps from the Microsoft Store. You'd be, messaging your friends with Yammer. You'd be doing all your search through an Internet Explorer window using Bing. But the reality is that we actually don't do that. What we do is use Facebook, Android, iOS. We buy our music from iTunes or the Amazon cloud. We use Google for search. And so the world that Microsoft has known and is comfortable and familiar with no longer exists. And it's really creating sort of a strategic quandary for Microsoft. And in fact, the longtime CEO, Steve Ballmer, announced his resignation last year. And we're really, we're waiting for the Microsoft board to find his replacement. And until that happens, Microsoft is really kind of in this strange place strategically where it's not entirely clear sort of where they're going to go from here because the way they've traditionally done things hasn't worked. And so what that's led to in the cloud-based file storage space is just, it's kind of a gold rush in some ways because there's this huge area where there needs to be a solution. We all want there to be a cloud-based file sharing solution, but no clear solution has emerged. And so there's a lot of different companies out there. It's a very competitive and crowded space because, basically the mobile OS, war, so to speak, is over. and iOS and Android One. You know, Bing is probably 3 or 4 years behind Google Search and always will be. You know, Amazon is clearly won the internet retail war. Facebook and Twitter have established their dominance. So those areas have all kind of sorted themselves out, but cloud-based file storage, we're just not entirely sure about, you know, where it is and what it's doing.
Yeah, I mean, we're clearly in a mobile-first world, and so a lot of these solutions, you know, kind of come from a very strong presence where, you know, they're mobile-first, they're easy to use on, you know, on your tablet, on your phone, in a way that, you know, trying to access your files in the file server from a, you know, on a VPN off your phone is just, you know, not going to work. It's an impractical solution. So, you know, in addition to that, there's a lot of venture capital funding that has been, you know, kind of flowing into this area. And so it really has, you know, we've seen a lot of investment in these different, you know, kind of cloud-based file sharing solutions. So we see a list up here. I think we'll go ahead and just get a poll to see what folks are using right now. So just launch a poll to see which cloud-based file sharing solutions that you're using right now. And if you can, you know, maybe limit this to your business use. If you don't use any in your business, but use it from a, you know, personal perspective, go ahead and share that in as well. We just included, you know, kind of the top couple. You know, it's not an exhaustive list. We could, you know, probably spend the rest of the webinar naming all the different cloud file sharing solutions. So we just included the, you know, some of the top front runners that we see in our kind of day-to-day work.
We probably should have, actually another poll question we could have asked, we didn't do this, but how many of these have you never heard of before? Because I know one of these I just read about in the last week. And I feel like, you know, there's not a week or a month that goes by where I'm not reading about some new cloud-based file sharing solution.
Yeah.
And for a long time I sort of felt like, well, maybe this will be the one. You know, they're going to have the answer. And I've been following the space long enough that I'm really starting to feel like that, you know, it's kind of we're on a quest for the Holy Grail, but we're not.
Yeah. That's great. We'll go ahead and share the results. You know, most folks are using DropBox, and you know, this wasn't a multiple choice. I saw one person commented in that they were using all, you know, 3 of these plus, you know, 2 more besides. So, you know, I know personally I use, you know, I have a Dropbox account, I have a Box account, I also have a Google Drive account, and my SkyDrive account. You know, so I've got data, you know, kind of splattered across, you know, 5 different services, and so it really is, you know, very, you know, kind of a very crowded marketplace with, you know, a lot of these services giving it away for free to try to grab market share.
Yep. So what's the answer? Like these are a subset of the wide variety of solutions that are out there. What's the right solution? Drum roll, please. The answer is there is no ideal solution. So I hope that's not a big disappointment for those of you following along, listening out there. And there are a couple specific reasons why there's no ideal solution, and I think that's very important to keep in mind. The main reason is that we're talking about Office files and Office documents. And to some degree, Microsoft has built that entire system around an on-premise file server that's running Windows. And as soon as you step outside of that environment, you run into technical challenges that are very difficult to overcome. And I think I may be, you know, making a prediction here that actually won't come true, but I'm starting to feel like the cloud is never going to work quite like the Windows-based file server. The easy GUI interface, you know, where you have a folder layout on your desktop, easy linking, file locking, all the things that we really like and appreciate about the local file system. It's just hard to ever see those working in a cloud-based environment. And I think then, you know, you look at the previous slide with all the different possibilities out there. Obviously, all of those companies, with their hundreds of millions of, you know, VC funding dollars, would love to figure out the answer to that. And the fact that none of them have yet, I think, suggests that, you know, it's a technical problem that maybe doesn't have an easy solution.
Yeah, I think a good example is just, you know, even in sharing this, you know, working on this presentation with Johan, you know, it's a 4 meg PowerPoint. You know, we had it on our file server. You know, we had it on, you know, some box accounts that we had. And we put it in our SharePoint. You know, and the simple, you know, act of, you know, doing the file checkout, you know, making sure that it's locked, making sure that Johan isn't going to make edits that I'm not going to be aware of. You know, that's that 10 to 15 second barrier to entry of using a file collaboration solution like SharePoint, just makes the barrier to entry of use a lot higher, and in our experience has really dampened down the adoption of a lot of these enterprise level file collaboration or cloud-based file sharing solutions.
Yeah, because I think the fact is people really want a solution that works, because that's the thing, like what we're used to, and particularly with Office 365 and Exchange, is that once you move to the cloud, your experience on the client side is basically the same, whether your server is on-premise or in the cloud. And people want that with their files. The reality is that's just not going to happen. And one of the solutions we've been recommending and implementing over the last 2 years is a solution called Egnyte. We've done some previous webinars on it if you want to learn more about it. They have information on their site. And it's a good solution, but it's basically a hybrid solution that combines a cloud-based file storage with an on-premise file storage. But the point where those two meet and they try to get them integrated just has it just doesn't work seamlessly. And it basically still has a lot of the same sort of limitations that pure cloud-based file sharing solutions have. So there are cases where Egnyte is a great solution, but it's definitely, they have not managed to, solve the fundamental problem that everyone else has sort of failed to solve as well. So in terms of looking ahead, what's going to happen, I actually think it's important to go back to Benedict's quote, where he talked about the underlying tasks. And one of the things that really impresses me about Microsoft Office is the way that Microsoft has really built software that is incredibly complex and feature-rich, but is relatively simple to use. And I think most, information age knowledge workers have spent the last 10, 15 years learning how to use Office and can do a lot of really cool things with it. And because it's such a, Microsoft loves to pour features into their products. And because it has so many features, people have managed to do all kinds of amazing things with Office that maybe it wasn't originally intended to be used for. So a great example I like to use is, our leadership team here at Community IT has a weekly meeting, and I maintain the agenda for that meeting. And for years I was using a spreadsheet, and we had that on our file server, and we all know where to get it. And then when we started to move out to the cloud, I put it in, we tried to use Google Docs for a little while. I tried to put it in SharePoint, and it never quite worked. And I finally started using something completely different called Trello, which is basically a web-based project management utility, and that works perfectly. And what I realized was, Excel was kind of, it could be a meeting agenda, but that really wasn't what Excel was built for. But because that's the tool I had at hand, that's what I was using. And so I think what we might start to see over the next, 3 to 5 years as a variety of single-purpose, sort of very well-designed, well-built web-based solutions come into the market, we'll start to see people using those instead of Office for doing things like project management, meeting agendas, and so forth. So that's that blue square over there, dedicated solutions. I think we're going to start to see a lot of the underlying tasks that have previously been done with Office move into these dedicated solutions. And we'll have some more examples of that later on in the webinar. I also think we're going to see embedded workflow solutions is what I'm calling it. I think Salesforce is probably one of the best examples of that. So an embedded workflow solution is one where you're doing something else with the solution. So in Salesforce, maybe you're working on grants. So you're kind of rolling grants. You're putting a grant together. And you have a process built into Salesforce, and people are using Salesforce to kind of follow that process. And the grant itself is a Word document, but that Word document is stored in Salesforce, and it kind of is, rolls along with Salesforce. Basecamp is another great example. People use Basecamp to do, web development projects, and maybe you have a Word document or a PowerPoint document that you're working on as part of that project. You basically would just store that document in Basecamp. It would make a lot more sense to store it there than to have it in a completely separate location. So I think we're going to start to see, embedded workflow solutions become more popular. And then also digital asset management. A lot of file servers are filled, to the brim, literally, with pictures and video files. Mm-hmm. And that's really, I think that's an area where it's really not a good, solution for how to manage all those digital assets. So the question becomes, as people start to move into these wider variety of solutions, how do you integrate, you want to make sure that we're not suddenly replacing one problem with 10 problems. And now, like Matt was saying, this presentation is in 5 different places. It's in my Box account, it's in SkyDrive, it's on our file server, it's in SharePoint. So that's going to become that's going to increase as a challenge. So getting back to the main topic at hand, and we want to we've kind of formulated the problem now of why finding a cloud-based file sharing solution is not, it's not an easy problem to solve, and it doesn't have an obvious answer. But we want to at least look at some of the best options for right now, at least. Let's talk a little bit about what you need to be able to do with a file sharing and storage solution that's based in the cloud. One, it needs to be easy to use locally, and it needs to be easy to use remotely. So if you implement a solution, or one of these solutions requires people to log into a website, and it's complicated, and they have to go through 6 screens, and they have to download the file, work on it, upload it back, that's not going to work. People are going to, that's not going to work. It's not only inefficient, but the user experience is very poor in that case. So it needs to, be easy to use both locally and remotely. Ideally, we want a cloud-based file sharing solution that's platform independent. So you don't have to require your staff to go out and buy a Surface Pro if they want to have a tablet that accesses files. These days it really needs to be supported on an iPad, on an Android tablet, ideally on an Android phone and an iPhone. Again, these are kind of the things that we expect from a cloud-based solution. It needs to have a strong mobile presence. It needs to have strong ecosystem integration. And I think this is something that people don't always think about. And that sort of goes back to the previous slide. So ideally, you want a solution. So a great example is Salesforce. If you want to use an embedded solution like Salesforce, you want to make, and you're going to store a lot of documents that you need to link easily to Salesforce, you want to make sure that, that the solution you're going with integrates with Salesforce. So, maybe Box integrates with Salesforce, but SugarSync doesn't. Is that going to cause a problem for your organization? So I think the front runners in this race, and we'll get to those in a second, part of if you emerge as a front runner, part of the value of being a front runner is that everybody else is going to want to integrate and work with your solution. So if I'm building an app and I have a choice of cloud-based file sharing solutions to integrate with, am I going to pick DropBox, which has massive adoption, 200 million users, or am I going to pick Interlink's DIA, which has 100,000 users? I don't even know.
I'm sure it's a great solution.
Exactly, and I'm not trying to criticize solutions that we've never heard of, but I do think it's part of the reason that we have platform wars in the first place is because developers need to know what kind of solutions they're supposed to be building on. And that's really the problem that's hurt BlackBerry and Windows Phone. Like if you're a developer and you only have enough resources to build 2 versions of your app, you're going to build on Android and iOS. And I think the same thing happens to a lesser degree and will continue to happen to an increasing degree with these cloud-based file sharing solutions. The next one is easy to collaborate in real time. The flip side of collaboration is file locking. So I think one of the big criticisms we've heard, over the last year or two with cloud-based file sharing solutions is that they don't lock the files, and you start to have version mismatch, and you have people opening the same file at the same time and making changes, and then one person's edits are lost. So people sort of say, I want file locking because that's what we're used to on a Windows server, but what they really want is real-time collaboration, which you currently get. So any of you who've used Google Apps know that if you open a Google Doc and someone else is opening it and working on it, you see them. You see their cursor. You have a little chat window you can talk to them with. And that would be the ideal. And I think that's an area that a lot of these solutions are trying to implement. But there are some challenges to that, which we'll talk about in a minute. And price, obviously, is a very important requirement.
Yeah, especially in the nonprofit sector, a lot of these cloud-based services, there's kind of the freemium model where they give away a little bit. It tends to be kind of personal-centric, but the minute you try to add in additional people or need additional space or maybe additional integration, then you need to pay for the service, and that kind of ongoing monthly recurring charge, can add up over time. So price is certainly a consideration when we look at all of these different solutions. So moving on to what we would consider the top.
I think we wanted to do one more poll. I'm sorry, Matt.
No.
We want to, if you're asleep, wake up. If you're, we wanted to get everybody engaged before we moved on to the front runner slide. So we want to know what challenges you're currently facing in file sharing. Or am I looking at an old poll?
No, you're looking at it. So,
yeah.
So easy to use, platform independent, strong mobile, strong ecosystem integration, easy to collaborate in real time.
Yeah. What's the hardest? So I realize how we phrase this question might be a little confusing. But what's most important but the hardest for you to find right now? So as we see everybody responding in, we'll go ahead and close the poll here in a second. So make sure you go ahead and click in your response. Get most folks to respond. So it looks like I'll share the results here. So the biggest challenge is the easy to use locally and remotely. So that's I think certainly what would kind of echo what we see as some of the biggest challenges in the adoption of these cloud-based file solutions. Yep. So let's talk about the front runners, and I think we phrased it in this way because we're not saying that these are the 3 best solutions necessarily, but these are the solutions that have the best chance of surviving sort of the so-called platform war around cloud-based file sharing that we're doing right now. So, and we'll talk a little bit more in a second about why we picked these 3. So let's go ahead and look at sort of the matrix of features. So along the top, you will see the requirements that we talked about just a few minutes ago. Ease of use, platform independent, strong and mobile, enterprise ready. This one we didn't talk about, but it's important. Security and centralized management, cloud ecosystem integration. So DropBox is one that, as you can see, it's very easy to use. And I think in general, DropBox by far has the greatest sort of brand recognition among the average person. And in fact, we rolled out Egnyte at an organization a couple months ago. And we did sort of a pilot study first to kind of make sure that it was going to work for them. And we asked people, like, what's the best thing and the worst thing about Egnyte? Like, what's working the best for you? Mm-hmm. And everyone said, oh, I love it. It works just like DropBox. So DropBox has sort of like entered the lexicon, if you will, as the way to do this. So from an end user standpoint, and I agree that my use of the DropBox system is rock solid. Like the thinking on the desktop works amazingly well. Like everything about it works great. It's a great consumer solution. I think, as you can see, it's really not ready at all for the enterprise. It's they had DropBox for work groups, I think it was called, and they rebranded it to DropBox for business about 9 months ago. And I think DropBox is starting to realize that there's really no money to be made in consumer cloud-based file sharing, and they're sort of scrambling to make their way into the enterprise where they can get people to actually pay for this service.
Yeah, and that's the challenge of a lot of these platforms where the business model is kind of give it away and hope for a conversion. Some of the numbers that I've seen is that for these premium products, they basically have a 1 to maybe 3% conversion rate. So the number of people that are actually paying for the service is relatively small. And if that's your business model, kind of giving away storage and hoping that 1% of the people are going to pay for it, it's not going to be a good long-term business model for that company to continue to stay in business offering that service. So I think what we've certainly seen is DropBox is very popular kind of on the consumer side. It's very familiar and known quantity. It kind of does what it does for an individual person very well. It does start to show some of its weakness when you get into larger number of users thinking perhaps different versions. and trying to manage that from a centralized perspective. I know one of the challenges that we find often with managing Dropbox in a network context is that all of a sudden somebody will decide to make the network drive their Dropbox folder, and so you'll come in one day and the communications department has dumped 100 gigs worth of pictures on their personal Dropbox folder, and that's synced over to the file server, and now your file server is out of space. So some of that centralized management and control is really lacking right now in Dropbox. And I think they are coming at it from a perspective of they know the consumer end, the individual end very well, and so they're making good strides, and they have a lot of financial backing to make it happen, to kind of professionalize and make their business model sustainable by appealing to the enterprise customer. But I think they have some holes to fill on the on the centralized management and really being ready for the enterprise.
That may be their monetization strategy. Just people accidentally fill their Dropbox account, go over their limit, and have to pay for the overage. But Dropbox, they're valued at $10 billion right now. They've been raising a crazy amount of VC funding. So there's certainly a lot of wealthier and smarter people than us who believe in them. Mm-hmm. But I do think they believe in them with these caveats. There are these challenges that they have to overcome. And I think when you compare the Dropbox for Business offering with the one that we're going to talk about next, Box, you just see right away how far behind they are in terms of sort of targeting the enterprise space.
Mm-hmm. So when you look at the line for Box, a very familiar name, I guess especially if you're looking at Dropbox, I think whereas Dropbox started from the consumer side and has kind of risen up to the business side, I think Box really started off as an enterprise product, reached down a little bit to attract the end user consumer model, and I think is really making a strong play and kind of bringing those two worlds together. Reducing the price, providing some good integration, providing that centralized security and management, and adding some additional features kind of beyond just accessing your files from a lot of different places. I know that they have some integration with Salesforce. They have an integration with a lot of other platforms that make it more than perhaps just a file share in the cloud.
Mm-hmm. They do have some limitations. It's not as easy to use as Dropbox. They don't have the brand recognition that Dropbox has, and they have another pretty serious limitation that all of these solutions share, which is they're not Microsoft, which is why we include SharePoint here. And I think people might be looking at that and scratching their heads and going, SharePoint, isn't that massive 800-pound gorilla collaboration solution that never actually succeeds? It's just an IT quagmire. That is part of its history. It's true, and I think Microsoft maybe faces some branding challenges around SharePoint. But Microsoft, it ain't quitting on SharePoint. It's continuing to push it forward, and SharePoint could easily become, and it already has, a variety of sort of file sharing and storage capabilities that I think Microsoft hasn't fully leveraged, but are certainly there. And you could, if you have Office 365, you could today start using SharePoint as your cloud-based file sharing solution. I think, the knocks on SharePoint are that it's hard to use, it's difficult to set up, it's not platform independent. You really need to be completely locked into the Microsoft ecosystem, and ideally with the latest Microsoft products. So you need to be running Windows 8 with Office 2013 on Office 365, and you'll have a really good SharePoint experience. But if you're on Office 2010 or Windows 7, or God forbid a Mac, your SharePoint experience is going to go downhill pretty quickly. And I think, that has always been Microsoft's strategy, and to use that approach to force people to upgrade to the latest Microsoft software on all of their devices. And I don't think that's a viable strategy anymore. But it's hard for large successful businesses to change their strategy overnight prior to changing the CEO.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead and look at the pricing on these as well. So we're familiar with the free Dropbox, and obviously if you give some referrals, you get some other people to sign up, that amount of storage space can grow. But basically a couple gigs for free. Once you get up into the pro category, the amount of space you have increases, and then you start to pay a little bit for the storage as the platforms go up. And in each of these different categories, you kind of add in features. So I would say if you're looking at this as a realistic file, kind of file server replacement, you need to be at least probably in the, the business category, which in all of these, for both Dropbox and Box, kind of adds things in like, Active Directory integration if you're an organization that has a centralized Active Directory to manage accounts. It includes the things like, kind of reporting, file auditing, the features that really make it a powerful collaboration solution, beyond just a way to, sync files between your work computer and your between your home computer. The price, is also on here, and the reason that SharePoint, it's interesting. It's very clear that SharePoint is kind of the legacy, the 800-pound gorilla, as Johan mentioned. Their approach, it's not the, oh, it's 100 gigs for $10 a month. No, for SharePoint, well, if you sign up with Office 365, you get 10 gigs as a base, and then you get 500 megs per additional user. Once you hit that limit, then if you need more space, it's 20 cents a gigabyte. There's a 100 gig, limit per site collection, which is how they manage it. And, oh, well, then you also get 25 gigs per user for OneDrive, which used to be called SkyDrive, but now it's called OneDrive. So, they kind of clearly suffer from too many CIOs in a sales meeting being like, no, you can't make it, simple and straightforward. We have to justify, our Microsoft licensing, certification somehow. So please, add as much complexity into the licensing model as you possibly can, and then we can sell it and, convince people that this is the right solution.
Yeah, our joke was, I mean, if you look at this graph, it says it all, really. Like, the Box and Dropbox are clearly, like, priced out in a way that's easy for the average person to understand. That's a consumer-driven approach. SharePoint is priced out in a way that forces you to hire a CIO to be able to make that decision. And that's been Microsoft's MO for a long time, and obviously they still sort of, operate in that way.
I mean, the fortunate thing is that for nonprofits, Microsoft has a very generous charity program, and so the Office 365 platform, which I think has been really fantastic. It's very mature. The most recent kind of version of upgrades, there's been some bumps, but it's I would say it's very solid, very stable. It works, exceedingly well, and kind of best of all, it's free for $4.50 a month per user, $4.50 per account per user per month, and so that's, I think, the real value of the Microsoft solution is that, for kind of all, just sign up and it's already available to you to take advantage of. And so I think the challenge for, organizations is to really look at, instead of, trying to replicate the file server in the cloud, going back to those initial kind of diagrams we had showing, what types of work are you, looking to do. So if you just want to move your, 300 gig of undifferentiated files, from the file server, and you want to dump it somewhere else and be able to get to it from anywhere, well then maybe all you need to do is get a Box account or get a Dropbox account. But if you want to look at more effective ways of working, so instead of running your meetings off of an Excel spreadsheet in a couple of different locations, maybe you switch that to Trello. Maybe your digital assets, instead of having them on the file server just in another drive, maybe that goes into a dedicated digital asset management system where you can track copyright information, you can provide different versions, you can make that available to stakeholders or members. So something kind of beyond just the basic file share and sharing platform. So
I think in the interest of time, we're gonna cruise through the next batch of slides. It's a nice summary, and these slides are going to be on SlideShare, which is another. It's essentially a cloud-based file sharing solution dedicated to PowerPoint presentations. So they'll be there. You can download them. But in summary, Dropbox built for the consumer, strong user adoption, simple interface, rock solid syncing functionality. The downsides. Not much centralized management, some concerns about security, not necessarily built for the enterprise, although we've been playing with a solution called Encrypted Cloud, which sort of adds a highly secure encryption layer on top of Dropbox. So as we kind of play with that some more, we might have some more to say about that. And then people criticize, analysts criticize Dropbox because it uses Amazon Web Services. And that's basically that's a great solution for the consumer space, but it's not really considered to be sort of reliable enough or secure enough for the enterprise. Box, good centralized management and administration, relatively easy to use, built for the enterprise. They have their own dedicated hosting environment at Equinix, so they kind of own their own servers. And Box integrates fairly well with SharePoint. Some of the downsides, the lower brand recognition, and this is a very difficult and competitive space. I mean, I think if you had to pick sort of one winner, consumer enterprise, DropBox would be it right now in terms of number of users. But obviously there's limitations as we discussed getting into the enterprise. And then SharePoint, free with Office 365, and with the size that we mentioned earlier, it integrates really well with Windows and Office, especially the latest versions. There's great centralized administration and security, clearly built for the enterprise. Some of the cons of SharePoint, complicated to set up and administer, very platform dependent. You really have to be on the latest and greatest Microsoft products. There's pretty poor mobile support, and that's, I think, being generous, because there is no SharePoint app for the iPad or Android. There is one for the iPhone for some reason. Why you prefer to edit your documents on your iPhone instead of your iPad, you know, I guess because the iPad's a competitor to the Surface was probably the thinking there. And there's pretty weak integration up with, you know, in the ecosystem, although that's starting to change. But this is the question we want to close with. Will any of this matter? So we spent a lot of time talking about the current state, but I think it's also very important to remember that this is this space, this crowded solution space, is very much still in play. And there are a couple of different factors that could dramatically change what happens over the next 6 to 12 months. So what's the first thing? Well, Microsoft could take over. So it kind of reminds me of, I think it was Winston Churchill who quipped that he trusted the United States to do the right thing after it exhausted every other option. And I sort of feel that way about Microsoft, where, you know, they'll build a great product once they've built all these bad ones first. And you sort of feel that, like, they keep banging on the SharePoint pinata, and eventually Candy's going to come out of it. I just feel like it has to. So the fact of the matter is that, go on, head to the next slide now. That there are some big pros that we didn't cover around SharePoint. And that's that Microsoft controls their own destiny because of Office. So if Microsoft, they get a new CEO, and he says, you know what, Windows, we're not going to push the Surface Pro anymore. We're not going to try to get everybody to use Windows. We're going whole hog with cloud-based Office. Office 365 is the future of this company, and we're going to go all out to make it a success. If that's the decision that Microsoft makes, they're going to win this. Because, kind of going back to the very beginning of this presentation, when we talk about files, we're talking about Office documents by and large. And if Microsoft decides they're going to build a system that makes it easy to store, edit, share, collaborate on Office documents in the cloud, then they win, because they control Office, which Box, DropBox, none of these other solutions control.
Yeah, and I think we're starting to see movement in that area already. So for those of you that are using Office 365, you may know that there's something called Office 365 or Office Web App. That's all being rebranded now as Office Online, so the end user experience is going to be, I think, improved dramatically. They're really making that shift towards kind of desktop-heavy applications to being delivered through the web browser. And as was noted earlier, if you're using Office 2013, if you're on Windows 8 or 8.1, as I am, your experience with SharePoint is significantly different and noticeably better than if you're using kind of Office 365 with Office 2010. And so that shift to making the browser, the browser-based Word or PowerPoint or Excel, really controls it. So then when you hit save, and it's in a SharePoint backend document library. That really is how all of the you're interacting with your files. Box has made a couple of steps into kind of doing some editing through the through their web-based document management portal. But fundamentally, that approach, even Google Apps, we saw a lot of folks say, yeah, we're using Google Drive. I still find that the Google Apps document editing, or Excel, and kind of spreadsheet editing, still leaves a lot to be desired. So I find myself kind of coming back to Office, more often than not, because I just can't get all, my needs met, or my level of comfort is not there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, some of you may be wondering, why didn't we talk about Google Apps? And I think it's because, in our experience, most people don't try, and those who have gone, have not stuck with it, because frankly, the Google applications for editing and creating documents are incredibly simplistic when compared with Office. And most people now, really need the functionality that Office provides. And so that, kind of goes back to this controlling their own destiny. If they get, like I said, if they get a CEO who makes Office 365 and maybe the Xbox, the top priorities of the company, I think they eat everyone else's lunch within the next 2 years. And also because migrating files is pretty frictionless. I mean, files are pretty easy to copy. It's not trivial, but it doesn't involve nearly the level of complexity that, moving to a new fundraising system or a new accounting package requires. So that's one possibility. The second the first thing, what could happen, Microsoft could take over. The second possibility, and these are by no means either or, all of these things could happen. We could see more and more files and file tasks, those underlying tasks that we were talking about. We could see more of that going through another system. So I could see the future looking something like this, where, people are starting to use Evernote instead of Word. They're starting to use Smartsheet, which is a web-based spreadsheet system for project management instead of Excel. They're starting to use Trello instead of Word and Excel. And the list goes on and on and on. This is just a tiny fraction of what's out there. We could see people moving towards using these dedicated solutions much more than using Office documents. We could see things like Basecamp and Salesforce start to be a place where people store documents of a certain type of purpose. We could see all of the files, all of the videos and picture files going out to a digital asset management solution. And so what you end up needing to store in something like Box or Dropbox or SharePoint becomes much, much smaller than it is now. Right now when people think of their file server, what you're really talking about is this huge pile of files of a variety of different types. And you're thinking, well, can I just move all that to the cloud? And what would the better thing to do really would be to kind of look at all those different files and really assess, like, what do you need? And does it really make sense to keep doing a lot of that stuff in files, or does it make sense to start moving it out into other solutions? So that's the second thing that could happen. And then the third possibility is we sort of have a long tail. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, long tail, I think it was a book. It's an economic phenomenon that we're starting to experience in society, where a lot of small sort of boutique solutions are becoming viable. So the example I like to cite is the beer industry. So if you go back to the 1890s, there were like over 2,000 individually owned and operated breweries in the United States. And that number got down to 84, I think, in 1979. And now it's back up to 2,500. So, you go to any town. It doesn't have to be, Portland, Oregon. It could be any town in the U.S., and you're going to find a lot of microbreweries. And there's a market for that. That's really the long tail. A wide variety of small solutions that meet very sort of specific needs and tastes, if you will. So we may see that as well. I mean, it could be possible that none of these dominate. We may not see the dominance of any of these, and different organizations just pick different ones based on sort of their unique needs. So we've come to the end of cloud-based file sharing in the cloud. As you can see, it still remains sort of a wide open space, and I still believe that a lot of it depends on what happens with Microsoft over the next year or two. A little fun fact to kind of close with before we move on to questions. You've heard of MySpace, right? It was the kind of before there was Friendster, before there was Facebook, there was well, I guess Friendster came before MySpace. At any rate, the guy who founded MySpace, he actually started a company. He started a company in like 2001, and he wanted to call it XDrive, and it was going to be a cloud-based file sharing solution. This was in 2001. But XDrive was taken, and so he called it MySpace instead. And so MySpace originally started as this place where you could store your files, but he couldn't ever really get it to work, so he switched over to sort of the social, the original so to speak, social media platforms instead. And now, I guess it's still around. I haven't been there. I think
Timberlake's an investor, so it's still around. I don't have a MySpace page. But.
Yeah. So anyway, all of that to say that this problem has been around for a long time, and I think it's going to be around for the next 3 to 5 years. But hopefully, this webinar has given you a good sense of kind of why it's such a problem and where we think it might be headed. Even though we're at time, there are a lot of questions, and we're going to be sticking around for another 15 or 20 minutes if necessary to answer people's questions. So feel free to stay on, or you can check the recording later to see if we got to your questions. Oh, yeah. So before we do that, our next webinar is on February 27th. We have a very special webinar in February. Donnie Shimamoto, who is kind of Matt and I, one of our sort of heroes in the IT for nonprofit consulting space. He's an expert when it comes to IT. He's a certified public accountant. He really sort of marries the world of nonprofit technology and financial management in a really elegant way. And he's come up with a great approach to IT budgeting that Matt and I have been following for a while and are still kind of learning. And so he's agreed to basically offer this webinar for free to our webinar audience, and it's one that you will not want to miss. It's going to be an hour and a half long, and it's a webinar he's given before. It's a presentation he gives a lot at conferences, and if you want a new way of thinking about your IT budgeting, kind of taking it to the next level, you're not going to want to miss it.
Yep, I would echo those sentiments. I've been to a couple of Donnie's presentations. He's a fantastic communicator. He really understands technology and the financial side, and I think helps to illuminate a lot of the issues that the finance people see whenever they look at IT. So I really encourage you to put that on your calendar. So please connect with us, follow us on Twitter or Google+, Facebook, or LinkedIn. There will be a short survey after you exit the webinar. We love your feedback. Help us to improve the content that we deliver or any of the technical details. So please feel free, or please, I encourage you to fill out that survey or any questions that were not answered. So if you've missed anything, don't worry. We will send out a link to the slides, and you'll also get a link to the recording of this as well, so you don't just have the slides, but you also have the conversation as well. So we'll go ahead and spend some time answering some questions. Mm-hmm. So I'll rely on Johan to ask them.
Oh, yeah.
My question bar has disappeared. So
okay. Let's see here. I'm just going back. I'm going to work my way backwards, actually. That might work a little bit better. So last question was, are there any solutions for low bandwidth situations? And I think that's a great question that kind of highlights one of the other problems or challenges, I guess, that are faced with file sharing in the cloud. Like, you really need to, those files need to be synchronized. And if you have like 20 people in your office and they all have DropBox running, and Dropbox is synchronizing all their changes all day long, it can really cause problems. I think that is really much more of a problem with large files. So we ran into that with an organization that had their designer had these really large InDesign files, and they had a pretty fast connection. It was a Comcast, probably 80 to 100 megabits per second, but it just struggled with uploading those files. And so we actually implemented Egnyte, and the advantage of Egnyte is that all the changes get saved to a local device, and then you have and basically only one device, that local device, acting as a file server, is synchronizing those changes with the cloud, and that really solves the problem for them. So, I mean, it kind of depends on the nature of your office, but that could be a possible solution for a low bandwidth situation. I think, and I really don't, and I please don't take offense with this, but I think oftentimes when people, obviously with international organizations, you face a lot of bandwidth challenges overseas. I think in the United States, in most places, there are some locations, particularly in rural areas, where this isn't possible. But I think it's now possible pretty much to get really good bandwidth. And I think organizations just need to make that a top priority in their IT budget. Because it's kind of because everything's moving to the cloud, you really need to have the bandwidth to access it. let's see, talk a little bit more about the integration of these apps with Salesforce.com. So, for example, the Box integration, you basically have links in Salesforce that connect you directly to Box, so that if you're storing a large number of files, part of your workflow that you set up in Salesforce, and you want to open those files, you don't have to open up Box separately. You click on the link and it basically just opens it directly. It's routing that request directly to Box through Salesforce. So basically, Box sort of acts as a repository that you're accessing.
Yeah, and it's essentially kind of a storage API from Salesforce into Box, because Salesforce you may be getting some licenses for free, but you do pay for the storage, and it can be kind of expensive. So Box can be a good solution to kind of get those big files and put them in a system that's kind of designed to store files, as opposed to a system that's designed to be a CRM.
And you probably won't see that with SharePoint, because I think SharePoint sort of sees itself as a competitor of Salesforce, and kind of per Microsoft's general strategy, they wouldn't build something that directly competed with one of the many product solutions and offerings. That could change, but that's kind of the case right now.
One of the questions was about somebody was a board member, and they had people with Macs and some PCs, and so is there any issue with kind of document integration or document sharing? I would say this has really improved, kind of leaps and bounds, and so at our organization, at Community IT, we have probably 3/4 of our leadership staff carry Macs, work on Macs almost exclusively. I'm in the PC world. Johan and I kind of both worked on this, and I'd say that document compatibility issues between accessing files on a Mac versus a PC, really isn't a big issue anymore. And these solutions, the ones that we've identified, DropBox, and Box, the document compatibility, it doesn't matter what platform you're accessing them from, it'll work anywhere.
We had a question about Box. Box Sync is available now, and I have tested that. It does work a lot like Dropbox. It's not quite as rock solid as Dropbox. I've used SkyDrive's client, and it's fine. And Egnyte's client is fine. I've found with all of these, there are times where I just have to restart them to get the syncing working, and I just feel like, in my experience, Dropbox has been just amazingly reliable. But Box does have a Box Sync, and it works pretty well. It does provide that Dropbox functionality. Somebody else asked about the simultaneous editing capacity of Office 365. They do sort of have it. Office 365 basically has the web app version, although they just rebranded that to Office Online.
That's right.
And if you log into a document with Office Online, it's getting better and better. Like every time I log in, I'm like, wow, this is a little bit better. And I think they keep improving it. And at some point, it's going to get so good that that's the hope, right? And that's what they're aiming for. That it'll get so good that people will just use that. But if you use that, it does have the simultaneous editing, but it doesn't work quite as well as Google Apps.
Yeah, I think Google Apps is still kind of that, the gold standard. What kind of comes to mind if you need to, just kind of throw a document out there and have, 10 different people have access to it, and just, kind of not have to worry too much about training or providing access, or kind of jumping through a bunch of hoops. It worked rather well. And I think there's been a lot of good competition between Google Apps and Microsoft and Office to really provide a platform that it works well and is effective. And I think that competition has benefited every organization, because the tools are improving so rapidly and so well.
Somebody asked the security outlooks going forward for all of these. That's a great question. One of the things I've noticed, I've been playing around with Box, is that if I change the Box password, any files that got synced onto a machine kind of get orphaned, which is not good from a security standpoint. Like from an enterprise perspective, you want the ability to kind of wipe and block access to those files once the user leaves the environment. Encrypted cloud, which I had mentioned during the webinar, is a solution that we're looking at, where you basically encrypt all your files, and then you can basically you basically give people the key to decrypt those files, and then you can revoke that key. So someone may have the file copied onto their machine, but if you revoke the key for accessing it, they suddenly can't access it anymore. So I don't know how polished or refined that solution is. We're just starting to look at it ourselves. But that's one possibility of how that problem might get solved. You just kind of have everything is encrypted, and you have keys that you use to decrypt, and then you just kind of manage access through a public encryption system. And that sort of speaks to a larger issue, which is authentication, identification and credentials. And that's probably a topic for
that might be
later.
Another webinar. Because, yeah, I mean, I certainly think that, kind of managing access to all these systems, I think particularly as we're, seeing the boundaries of, kind of work and personal space, blur, and, managing, access to different resources, incorporating BYOD policies into all of this. It does get, it's very exciting, but very kind of complicated and, difficult, I think, system to navigate all these different questions that kind of come up when, the file server is kind of no longer, you come to the office, you sit down at your computer, you connect to the file server down the hall. We're in a much different world, I think a much better space in order to kind of facilitate the type of work and collaboration that we're all doing in our day-to-day lives, but it does raise kind of a whole set of additional questions that kind of weren't even on the table 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's Paul who asked that question had a follow-up that he's looking at GPG as an encryption tool set, but worrying about the learning curve for the users. And that speaks exactly to your comment there. I mean, I think, and I hope that you haven't taken any of my comments to be, ragging on Microsoft. I think these are all problems that Microsoft had basically solved for us for the last, 20 years or so. But, advances in technology have kind of catapulted us out of that world and into a new world where solutions to these problems really haven't been developed yet, and they're in the process of being developed. I want to hit a few more. We still have quite a few people on the call, so I want to hit a few more. So there are a number of people asking about Google Drive. I think I spoke to that a little bit, but just to reiterate, kind of going back to the original premise, which is when we talk about files, we're talking about Office documents. Using Google Drive, I guess you could use the sync functionality of Google Drive. So if you're on Google Apps, Google Drive has a sync utility, and you can actually store Office documents in your Google Drive folder structure. And so people who are using Google Apps could use Google Drive to do that. So you probably should have mentioned that as one of the many options. There's nothing particularly unique about how Google Drive does that to really commend it above any other solution. I think if you're on Google Apps already, there's some integration with your authentication system. That could be useful, but sort of all of the other problems and challenges you have around trying to use Microsoft Office documents on a cloud-based file sharing solution are still there with Google Drive. And I think, I guess Google Drive for me sort of would fall into the long tail category. Like for people who are on Google Apps, which is not a large number of nonprofits, but it's a significant number, Google Drive may be the best solution, for that.
Yeah, and I would say kind of what we see is that, probably 2 or 3 years ago, we were doing maybe, 50-50 migrations to Google Apps versus Microsoft's cloud-based solution. And that number has really kind of dramatically swung over in favor of Office 365, particularly since they've made it free. So I think, kind of our orientation is that, Google Apps is certainly, I think, a good platform, and I think it, should, kind of be in consideration, if you're looking at kind of migrating email and, files and, chat and all these other things. And we've had some, kind of large organizations make that transition, kind of at the same time. Most organizations, whenever they, have the choice of going with, it's what are they familiar with that, kind of end user productivity interaction? Like, do they like Outlook and that, folder structure, or do they like Google Gmail and the tag? That's kind of your decision point. So if you're an organization that kind of prefers that kind of tagging structure, then yeah, I mean maybe Google Apps with Google Drive and Sites that's more closely aligned to how your staff work. That I think that really kind of can help make that decision. If you're kind of just looking at the field of we need a new file kind of cloud-based file sharing and collaboration platform, there's probably other solutions that are maybe more better suited to what you're looking at. So then it would be DropBox or Box, and then if you're already on Office 365, then I think it's really they make the price makes it compelling, and I think the recent improvements make it compelling, particularly if you're kind of an all-in Microsoft shop. Anyway.
And I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I would like nothing better than for Microsoft to start thinking of itself as a startup, kind of adopt that mentality. Like, we're a cloud-based startup, and we have this great solution called Office, and we want to dominate that space, and we want to get out there on every platform, have an experience that's amazing for everybody who's using that system. I really hope that that's the approach that they take, when the new CEO starts, because I think Office is an amazing product, and often gets sort of overlooked for just how some of the amazing things that Microsoft has done with that product. Just the complexity of it, but it's complexity of feature set and functionality, simplicity of use. And there are very few. I mean, it's easy for us to say, "Oh, Trello is amazing." Well, Trello does like one thing. It does like two things. So of course it's amazing. It's right.
It does two things. It does them well.
It does them really well. Office does a lot of things really well, and I think it would be a shame if that goes away. If we lose that. So some comments that there were some comments that SharePoint is getting easier to set up. I think that might very well be the case. We're most likely, 100% likely, going to really focus on using SharePoint internally here, along with some of these other solutions, to get a better feel for them over the next 6 to 12 months. And I think Microsoft will continue to evolve them as well. And so, don't take it. I mean, I think that this presentation is going to be very dated in 6 months, because the space is going to continue to change. Particularly that graph with sort of the colored evaluation of the different solutions. It's kind of like where things are right now. But we could see DropBox suddenly become an amazing enterprise solution. We could see Office 365 and SharePoint suddenly become very easy to use and cross-platform, platform independent.
Yeah, I mean, I think there really is, a lot of motion and energy in the space. I mean, as we mentioned before, there's lots of VC money, kind of chasing all these different solutions. There's got to be some consolidation. I mean, I think the marketplace just can't, kind of continue to support as many different, options, kind of all giving away, kind of the storage for free. And so somebody's got to figure out how to make, some money at it. Microsoft has, figured out, how to make money and how to lose money, and so they have a bigger pile of cash to start with. So
Microsoft could be in this game for a long time. I mean, they have the runway is just almost infinitely long for them in terms of their resources, and their existing market share is pretty strong too. So it's just that I think, from my perspective, Microsoft has made a lot of mistakes over the last 4 or 5 years. So it's kind of like what's the big, what's the elephant going to do next? Like, is it going to go in the right direction, or is it going to keep like sort of knocking stuff over? Let's see. We've got a couple more minutes, and still have a number of attendees on the call. Someone asked about FTP solution. I think FTP is, so Box off, I think all of these, Box and Egnyte, I know for certain, and many of the other ones probably, offer FTP access to the file sharing solution. I think FTP as a protocol has largely fallen out of favor just because of it's a very old protocol, and from a security standpoint, it's not great. But you can get that functionality with those solutions. I think what's replacing it is sort of, basically SSL links. So any of these solutions, including DropBox, you can create a link that'll allow people to download either publicly or privately.
Yeah, and I think, with all these solutions, we didn't get into, kind of the exhaustive feature comparison list for all of these solutions. You can, find those out on the internet. I mean, essentially, most things that you want to do, they're going to do it. And so the kind of the file sharing with people outside of your organization, for all of these, you can create, unique links for the documents that can be, visible only, to the people that you, so that only the people that have that link. And so that has largely replaced the need to kind of FTP files kind of here and there. Often FTP does not include SSL or security, so those passwords are transmitted in plain text, so that's not a great way to send information, particularly if it's sensitive or even if you're concerned about having your password compromised. So.
Two more questions.
Sure.
So one is around. Actually, I'm going to take two questions and try to roll them into one, and then one other one after that. So there's a question around the single file size limit, and all of these solutions have single file size limits, and they actually vary depending on the level that you purchase. So I forget off the top of my head what the specifics are, but it's something like
most of them, like the initial file size limit is like 2 gigs.
Yeah.
As you kind of go up, then that goes up to maybe 5 gigs for a single file. So so that should cover kind of most types of files that you're dealing with. Kind of the exception is, are you trying to deal with video? Trying to deal with kind of massive picture libraries like graphic production data. In that case, there's probably a better solution to deal with that data, than kind of dumping it into what's essentially a file server somewhere. So
yeah, and that gets to the other question I wanted to roll in, which is our thoughts on using cloud storage for large media, video, image files. That's a whole other really solution space called digital asset management, and that's an area where we really need to get more up to speed, I think. We're aware of a few solutions, but we haven't. Because there's a lot more involved in that. It's not just storing large files, but I think the file server is a great solution it's been a good solution for storing your Office documents. I think most people would agree it's a very bad solution for storing video files and picture files because there's no tagging. It's hard you can sort by date, but you can't sort by, GPS location. It's hard to basically manage those digital assets. And so that's what digital asset management solutions do. They provide you with, the ability to index, search really quickly, manipulate, and so forth. And, obviously there are very expensive solutions that do that really well, but I think finding sort of a solution that works in the small, medium-sized nonprofit space still kind of out there. I'm kind of curious to see what happens with Adobe Creative Cloud. Adobe switched to basically a cloud-based subscription licensing model for their software, and I think they're slowly kind of moving into the cloud space. Right now, it basically connects with Behance, which is a sort of a portfolio site for creatives, but it's not necessarily a digital asset management site. But I think that's an interesting, that's a whole different sort of segment of technology solutions that I'm really interested to see kind of where that goes. And then the last question is about using the cloud as a place to back up files. And there are a lot of services. That's also kind of a slightly different segment from what we've been discussing. The big ones are Mozy Pro, Carbonite, CrashPlan, Backblaze, iBackup. Actually, it's kind of a whole other Wild West of solutions sort of separate from file sharing. I know that 10 years ago, I think it was, like iBackup tried to do a file sharing solution called iDrive, and they may still have it. It never worked well in any place that we've tried it. So for whatever reason, these are two sort of very different solutions, even though they do kind of similar things. We've had good luck with iBackup. I've heard good things about Mozy Pro. For the organizations that we manage, they're not great solutions for us because there's no sort of centralized way for us to make sure that they're running and doing what they do. But for an organization that has someone in-house and doesn't want to, invest in a more robust solution, it can be a good way to keep their files up to date.
Yeah, the other thing I would say with, with these, cloud solutions and cloud backups, you really need to know and understand the service level agreement around them. And so I think, when you dig into the service level agreements of the Carbonite and the iBackups, it doesn't instill a whole lot of confidence, and so there's often no guarantee that the data is going to be available. It's often on a kind of a best effort approach, and so just kind of go into it with eyes wide open. And kind of our expectation with solutions like that is that you're basically looking at kind of about a week turnaround if you kind of lose all the data in that folder. by the time you kind of try to download it all, or they just put it on a disk and mail it to you. So the online backup space, it is really appealing to get these, whatever, $50 a month or $10 a month for unlimited backup. But you really need to kind of look in and kind of read the fine print to know what you're actually getting. Kind of switching over to the digital, kind of cloud-based file solutions, a lot of them will do versioning, and so you'll be able to kind of that's the backup method there, that you can see multiple versions of the file. There will be some kind of network deletion or kind of way to keep files back up there. Obviously, if you want to be kind of extra secure and extra careful, you can also back those solutions up as well, or kind of download a copy to have locally in case something happens, your account access is suspended, or they decide you're doing something inappropriate and they lock access out. So just because your data is in the cloud doesn't mean it's kind of automatically going to be backed up the same way that you think it's going to be backed up. So really kind of pay attention to the fine print to understand what you're signing up for.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I mean, people should not assume that just because their files are now in Box or DropBox, they're suddenly being backed up. Those solutions offer versioning, but if the account, like in DropBox, if you delete their account, those files are gone. I think in Google, this is a little bit different, but if you're in Google Apps, if you delete the user account, you have 5 days to contact Google, and if you don't, that data is gone forever. And even if you do, there's no guarantee that they can restore it. So hence, there's third-party solutions now that back up a file, which basically back up all of your Google data to another location. So it's important for you to know, what your metrics, what the business metrics are around backing up, retaining, and restoring data, and making sure that the solution you're using meets those metrics. So don't just assume that because you're in the